They inherited an island they'd never seen before, a lighthouse, a journal, a grandfather's buried shame. Some legacies aren't gifts. They're confessions waiting. The sea remembers what families try to forget. If you inherited the truth, someone died hiding. Would you still want it? The ferry cuts through gray water like a blade through silk. Isla stands at the railing, her hands gripping the cold metal, her breath visible in the November air. Beside her, Kieran leans forward, watching the island emerge from the fog. A dark shape rising from the sea, all jagged cliffs and dense pine forest. Wild and beautiful, in a way that feels almost hostile. Greystone Island. She hasn't been here in 20 years. The last time she stood on this ferry, she was 18 years old, leaving for college with a single suitcase and a promise to herself that she'd never come back. Her father, Callum, had stood on the dock and watched her go without saying a word. She didn't look back. She never called. She built a life far away from this island, far away from the silence that filled every room of the keeper's cottage, far away from the man who stopped being her father the day her mother died. Now he's gone too, 4 months dead. And somehow, impossibly, he's brought her back. The lawyer's letter arrived 3 weeks ago, a single page of legal language that boiled down to this. Callum left her the island. 40 acres of rock and forest and memory. But there's a condition. She and Kieran must live on the island for 30 days before they can claim full ownership. Only then can they sell it. Isla was furious when she read it. One last manipulation. One last way to force her into his world, even from the grave. But she needs the money. Her job as a medical transcriptionist barely covers rent, and Kieran's college fund is non-existent. The real estate agent said the island could sell for $500,000, maybe more if they're willing to wait for the right buyer. 30 days, that's all it takes. So here they are, the ferry docks with a dull thud against the wooden pilings. Kieran grabs their bags and jumps onto the dock before Isla can stop him, his sneakers landing on weathered planks that creak under his weight. He's 16, tall and wiry, with her dark hair and his father's restless energy. He's never been here before, never met Callum, never even seen a photograph of him, because Isla made sure of that. She steps off the ferry more carefully, feeling the shift from water to land like a border being crossed. The island smells like salt and rotting wood. The air is thick with fog, and somewhere in the distance, waves crash against the rocks with a rhythm that sounds almost like breathing. The lighthouse stands at the northern point, a weathered tower of white stone and peeling paint, its glass cracked and dark. Surrounding it are dense trees, their branches twisted by decades of wind, and beyond them, cliffs that drop straight down into the churning sea. It looks exactly the way she remembers it. Isolated, beautiful, haunted. Kieran walks ahead, his hands shoved in his jacket pockets, his eyes scanning the tree line. "This is it?" he asks, his voice carrying on the wind. "This is it." It's kind of amazing. Isla doesn't respond. She follows the path toward the keeper's cottage, a small stone building beside the lighthouse with a sloped roof and shutters that hang crooked on their hinges. The door is unlocked. It always was. Her father never locked anything. Inside, the cottage smells like dust and mildew. The furniture is covered in sheets. The windows streaked with salt spray, the floor littered with dried leaves that must have blown in through the cracks. It feels abandoned, like a place people left in a hurry and never came back to. Kieran drops the bags by the door and walks through the rooms slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the old photographs hanging in warped frames. "He lived here alone?" he asks. "For 20 years. That's a long time to be by yourself." Isla doesn't answer. She walks to the kitchen and opens the cabinets, finding them mostly empty except for a few cans of soup and a jar of instant coffee. The sink is rusted. The stove looks like it hasn't been used in months. She hears Kieran call from the other room. "Mom, come look at this." She finds him standing by the front door, holding something small in his hand. A rusted compass, its glass cracked, the needle spinning aimlessly inside the casing. He pulled it from a hook by the door, where it had been hanging beside a faded note written in her father's handwriting. Some directions are only found by standing still. Isla's breath catches. She takes the compass from Kieran's hand and slips it into her coat pocket without explaining. "Unpack your things," she says, her voice tight. "We'll start cleaning tomorrow." Kieran watches her for a moment, then nods and disappears into one of the bedrooms. Isla stands alone in the cottage, the compass cold and heavy in her pocket, and listens to the wind move through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaks open and shut, rhythmic and haunting. She doesn't want to be here. She doesn't want to think about her father, or the silence he carried, or the 20 years she spent building a life without him. But the island doesn't care what she wants. It's been waiting. They spend the first 4 days cleaning. Isla scrubs dust from every surface, replaces broken shutters, sweeps leaves from the corners of rooms that smell like rust and mildew. She works methodically, silently, her hands moving across furniture that hasn't been touched in months. The cottage feels abandoned, like a place people fled rather than left. There are dishes still in the sink, a jacket still hanging by the door, a coffee mug on the desk with a dark ring stained into the ceramic. Her father lived here alone for 20 years, and it shows. Kieran doesn't help much with the cleaning. He's restless, always moving, always exploring. On the second day, he finds an old wooden boat tied to the dock, half rotted and listing to one side, its hull thick with barnacles. On the third day, he discovers a trail through the forest that leads to a clearing where a stone foundation sits. The charred remains of a house that burned decades ago. He comes back with questions Isla doesn't answer. She avoids him. She avoids the island. She avoids the memories that surface every time she opens a drawer or looks out a window and sees the lighthouse standing dark against the sky. She was 16 when her mother died. It was sudden, an aneurysm, no warning. One moment, her mother was making breakfast, humming softly, and the next she was on the floor, her eyes open but unseeing. Isla called for her father, screaming, but by the time he came running from the lighthouse, it was already over. After that, Callum changed. He stopped talking, stopped looking at her. He spent every evening standing at the top of the lighthouse, staring at the sea, his shoulders hunched as if carrying something unbearably heavy. Isla would stand at the bottom and call up to him, asking if he was okay, asking if he wanted dinner, asking if he would please just say something. But he never answered. He just stood there, watching the water, silent and unreachable. She left 2 years later and never came back. On the fourth night, Kieran sits across from her at the small kitchen table and asks the question she's been avoiding. "Why did you leave?" Isla doesn't look up from her coffee. "It was time." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." Kieran leans back in his chair, his arms crossed. "You never talk about him. Not once. My entire life. I didn't even know he existed until the lawyer called. There wasn't much to say. He was my grandfather. He was a stranger." Kieran shakes his head slowly. "I don't believe that." Isla finally looks at him. "What do you want me to say, Kieran? That he was a good father?" "He wasn't. He shut down after Mom died. He stopped being a person. He just existed, and I couldn't stay here and watch him disappear." Kieran is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "I found pictures." Isla's hands tighten around her mug. "In the living room," Kieran continues. "Old ones. You're maybe 5 or 6. He's holding you on his shoulders. You're both smiling. That's not a stranger. Isla stands abruptly and walks to the sink, her back to him. People change. Yeah, Kieran says softly. They do. He leaves the kitchen, and Isla listens to his footsteps fade into the other room. She stands at the sink for a long time, staring out the window at the dark shape of the lighthouse against the night sky. The next morning, she finds the desk. It's in the corner of the living room, buried under a stack of old newspapers and unopened mail. She's been avoiding it, but now she pulls the chair out and sits down, running her hands over the scarred wood. There are initials carved into the corner. C.M. Callum Merrick, her father. She opens the drawers one by one. Most are empty, but the bottom drawer on the right is locked. She pulls the rusted compass from her coat pocket and studies it. The needle still spins aimlessly, but the casing feels heavier than it should. She turns it over in her hands and notices a small groove along the edge, barely visible. She presses it, and the back panel slides open, revealing a tiny key hidden inside. Her breath catches. She fits the key into the lock. It turns with a soft click. Inside the drawer, a leather journal bound with string, its pages yellowed and brittle. A stack of letters tied with twine, their envelopes addressed in her father's handwriting, and a black and white photograph of a young woman standing beside the lighthouse, someone Isla doesn't recognize. The woman is smiling, her hand shielding her eyes from the sun. Isla lifts the journal carefully and unties the string. The first entry is dated March 1963, written in her father's precise script. They say I'm a hero, but heroes don't choose who lives and who dies. I did. Isla stops breathing. She stares at the words, her hands trembling, the journal cold and heavy in her lap. Outside, the wind picks up, and the door that's been creaking for days finally slams shut. Isla reads the journal alone. It's past midnight when she starts, sitting at the kitchen table with the leather-bound book open in front of her, a single lamp casting dim light across the yellowed pages. Kieran is asleep in the other room. The cottage is silent except for the sound of wind moving through the trees and the distant crash of waves against the rocks. She turns the pages slowly, carefully, her fingers tracing the lines of her father's handwriting. The first entries are practical: weather observations, maintenance notes for the lighthouse, lists of supplies needed from the mainland. But 3 pages in, the tone shifts. The handwriting becomes tighter, more urgent. March 14th, 1963, storm coming. Radio says it'll be bad. Winds over 60 knots. I've seen worse, but not often. March 15th, 1963. The mariner's call ran aground just after midnight. Cargo vessel out of Boston. I saw the distress flares from the lighthouse and took the boat out. 7 men clinging to the wreckage. Seas too rough to take them all at once. Had to make a choice. Isla stops breathing. She reads the next entry. I took the captain first. He knew the waters, could help me navigate back through the storm. Took 2 crew with him. Got them to shore. Went back. Second trip. 3 more. All alive. Barely. Hypothermia setting in. Got them inside. Wrapped them in blankets. Radioed for help. Third trip. Too late. Her hands shake as she turns the page. His name was Liam Callahan. 22 years old. Engaged to be married. I left him for last because the captain said he was strong. Said he could hold on. But the sea doesn't care how strong you are. By the time I got back, he was gone. Swept away. Just gone. Isla's throat tightens. She keeps reading. They're calling me a hero. 6 men saved. The newspapers want interviews. The harbor master wants to put up a plaque. But I'm not a hero. Heroes don't choose who lives and who dies. I chose. I took the captain first because he could help me. I made a calculation, and Liam Callahan paid for it. The handwriting becomes erratic, the words smudged as if written in haste or anguish. I see his face every time I close my eyes. I hear his voice in the wind. He called out to me when I left. He said, "I'll hold on." And I believed him. I believed the sea would let him hold on long enough. But it didn't. Isla closes the journal and presses her palms against her eyes. She sits there for a long time, trying to process what she's read. Her father saved 6 people, risked his life 3 times in a blizzard, but all he could remember was the one he didn't save. She opens the journal again and flips through the later entries. They're all the same. Pages and pages of guilt, of replaying that night, of wondering if he made the right choice, wondering if there even was a right choice. On one page, he's written Liam's name over and over, filling the margins, the letters growing larger and more desperate. Liam Callahan. Liam Callahan. Liam Callahan. Isla's chest aches. The next morning, she finds Kieran in the kitchen making coffee. She sets the journal on the table in front of him and tells him to read it. He looks at her, confused, then picks up the journal and starts reading. She watches his face as he processes the words. His expression shifts from curiosity to shock to something softer, understanding maybe, or sadness. When he finishes, he sets the journal down carefully. He saved 6 people, he says quietly. I know. He risked his life, multiple times. I know. Kieran looks at her. Then why does this feel so heavy? Isla exhales slowly, because he couldn't forgive himself. He spent 40 years carrying the guilt of a choice he made in seconds. And it destroyed him. Kieran is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "Is that why he stopped talking to you? Because he didn't think he deserved to be loved?" Isla doesn't answer. She doesn't know how to. She thinks about her father standing at the top of the lighthouse every night, staring at the sea. She always thought he was lost in grief over her mother. But now she realizes he was watching the place where Liam Callahan died, the place where he made a choice that saved 6 lives but cost 1. "There's more," she says, reaching for the stack of letters tied with twine. She unties them carefully and spreads them across the table. Every envelope is addressed to the same person, Marin Callahan, Port Malin, Maine. Kieran picks one up and turns it over. "Who's Marin?" "I don't know," Isla says, "but I think she's connected to Liam." She opens the first letter, dated April 1963. Her father's handwriting fills the page. "Dear Marin, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if I'll ever send it. But I need to write it down. I need you to know that I'm sorry. I made a choice that night, and your fiancé paid for it. I took the captain first because I thought it was the right thing to do. But I was wrong. I should have taken Liam. I should have—" The letter cuts off mid-sentence, as if Callum couldn't finish. Isla opens another letter. Then another. They're all the same. Apologies, explanations, confessions he never sent. Decades of guilt poured onto paper but never delivered. Kieran looks at the pile of letters, then at Isla. "Do you think she's still alive?" Isla's breath catches. "I don't know. But she realizes she needs to find out. It takes Kieran less than an hour to find her. He sits at the kitchen table with his phone, searching through obituaries and public records while Isla stands by the window, staring out at the lighthouse. She's holding one of the letters, the paper thin and brittle between her fingers. Callum's handwriting faded but still legible. "Dear Marin, I'm sorry." That's how they all begin. Kieran looks up from his phone. "I found him. Liam Callahan. There's an obituary from March 1963. It says he was 22, engaged to Marin Callahan. It mentions an unborn daughter." Isla closes her eyes. Kieran keeps scrolling. "Wait, I think she's still alive." Isla turns. "What?" He shows her the screen. A property record. A small house in Port Malin. a coastal town 15 miles south of the island. The owner is listed as Maren Callahan, age 83. Isla's hands tremble. She's still there. Kieran nods. Do you want to go? She doesn't answer immediately. She looks down at the letter in her hand, then at the stack of others tied with twine on the table. Decades of apologies Callum never sent. Decades of guilt he carried alone. I don't know, she says quietly. Kieran stands and walks over to her. He spent his whole life carrying this. Maybe she deserves to know he never forgot. Isla looks at her son, then back at the letters. Finally, she nods. They take the ferry the next morning. The ride is short, the water calm, the sky pale and overcast. Isla holds the stack of letters in her lap, wrapped carefully in cloth. Kieran sits beside her, quiet, watching the mainland grow larger as the island shrinks behind them. Port Malin is a small fishing town, its harbor lined with weathered docks and boats listing gently in the tide. They drive through narrow streets until they find the address. A small house perched on a hill overlooking the water, its siding faded by salt and sun, its garden overgrown but cared for. Isla parks the car and sits there for a long moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Kieran touches her arm gently. You don't have to do this. Yes, she says. I do. She gets out of the car, takes the letters, and walks up the gravel path to the front door. Kieran follows. She knocks. The door opens slowly and an elderly woman appears. She's small, silver-haired, with sharp blue eyes that study Isla carefully. She's wearing a cardigan over a simple dress, her hands weathered and veined. Can I help you? The woman asks, her voice soft but clear. Isla's throat tightens. Are you Maren Callahan? The woman's expression shifts. Recognition, curiosity, something like caution. I am. Isla exhales slowly. My name is Isla Merrick. My father was Callum Merrick. He was the lighthouse keeper on Greystone Island. Maren's eyes widen slightly. She looks at Isla for a long moment, then at Kieran, then back at Isla. You're his daughter. Yes. Maren steps back and opens the door wider. Come in. Inside, the house is small and warm, filled with photographs and books and the smell of tea. Maren leads them to a sitting room with a window overlooking the harbor. She gestures for them to sit, then lowers herself into a chair across from them. I knew your father, Maren says quietly. Isla's chest tightens. You did? Maren nods. He came to see me once. 20 years ago, maybe more. He stood on my porch and told me he was the man who saved 6 people from the Mariner's call in 1963, and that he was the man who didn't save my husband. Isla's breath catches. Maren's voice is calm, steady. He asked me if I hated him. What did you say? I told him no. Maren looks down at her hands, folded in her lap. Liam wouldn't have wanted me to carry hate. He was kind. He would have understood that your father made a choice in an impossible moment. Isla's eyes burn. But my father never forgave himself. I know, Maren says softly. I tried to tell him that. I tried to tell him Liam would have wanted him to live without that weight, but he couldn't hear it. He left before I could say everything I needed to say. Isla reaches into her bag and pulls out the stack of letters, still wrapped in cloth. She sets them on the table between them. He wrote to you, Isla says, her voice breaking. For 40 years, he never sent them. But he wrote them. Maren stares at the letters, her hand rising slowly to her mouth. She reaches out and touches the cloth gently, then unwraps it. She lifts the first letter, dated April 1963, and reads the opening line. Dear Maren, I'm sorry. Her eyes fill with tears. She sets the letter down carefully and looks at Isla. He carried this his whole life. Yes. Maren wipes her eyes with the back of her hand. And you? Did he carry it with you too? Isla nods, her throat too tight to speak. Marin leans forward and takes Isla's hand. Her grip is warm, firm, grounding. Your father wasn't a bad man. He was a man who made a choice and couldn't forgive himself for it. And because of that, he lost more than just Liam. He lost you. Isla closes her eyes, tears spilling over. Marin squeezes her hand gently. Liam would have forgiven him. I forgave him. But he needed to forgive himself, and I don't think he ever did. They sit in silence for a long moment, the only sound, the faint ticking of a clock on the mantel, and the distant cry of gulls over the harbor. Finally, Marin releases Isla's hand and picks up the stack of letters. May I keep these? Isla nods. They were meant for you. Marin smiles sadly. Thank you. As they stand to leave, Marin touches Isla's arm. He loved you, you know, even if he couldn't show it. The guilt made him believe he didn't deserve to. Isla's voice is barely a whisper. I know. They walk back to the car in silence. Kieran doesn't ask questions. He just sits beside her as she starts the engine and drives back toward the ferry. And as the island comes into view across the water, Isla realizes something she's never let herself believe before. Her father wasn't cruel. He was drowning, and he never learned how to ask for help. They return to the island in silence. The ferry ride back feels longer than it did on the way out. Isla sits at the railing, watching the mainland shrink behind them, Marin's words still echoing in her mind. He loved you, even if he couldn't show it. The guilt made him believe he didn't deserve to. Kieran stands beside her, his hands shoved in his jacket pockets, his face turned toward the island emerging from the fog. He doesn't ask questions. He just stands there, present, waiting. When they dock, Isla goes straight to the cottage. She sits at the kitchen table and opens the journal again, turning past the entries she's already read, searching for something she can't name. The pages grow darker as she goes. Callum's handwriting becomes tighter, more desperate, the ink smudged in places as if written in haste or anguish. I hear his voice in every storm, Liam, calling out. I'll hold on, he said, and I believed him. I thought the sea would let him hold on long enough, but it didn't. And now I hear him everywhere, in the wind, in the waves, in the silence between breaths. Isla's chest tightens. She keeps reading. I try to be a good father to Isla. I try to smile when she smiles. I try to be present. But every time I look at her, I see Liam's face. I see the family he never got to have, the daughter he never got to meet. And I think this should have been someone else's child, someone who deserved to grow up with a father who wasn't broken. Isla's hands shake. She closes the journal and presses it against her chest, her eyes burning. All these years, she thought her father didn't love her. She thought she wasn't enough to pull him out of his silence. She thought she'd done something wrong, said something wrong, been something wrong. But it was never about her. He didn't withhold love because he didn't care. He withheld it because he didn't believe he deserved to give it. She spent her entire life thinking she wasn't enough. But the truth is, he thought he wasn't enough. Kieran finds her sitting at the table, the journal still pressed to her chest, tears running silently down her face. He sits beside her without speaking, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. After a long moment, he says, "Can people be forgiven for things they can't undo?" Isla looks at him, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know." "He saved 6 people," Kieran says quietly. "He risked his life 3 times, but all he could think about was the one he couldn't save." Isla nods, wiping her eyes. "He was drowning. And I didn't know. I was so angry at him for leaving me that I never saw he was drowning right in front of me." Kieran squeezes her shoulder gently. You were a kid. You couldn't have known. But I could have tried to understand. So could he. Isla looks at her son, and something shifts in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something softer. Understanding, maybe, or the beginning of it. They sit in silence for a while, the sound of the wind moving through the trees, the distant crash of waves against the rocks. Then Kieran says, "Do you want to go up?" Isla looks towards the window, where the lighthouse stands dark against the evening sky. She nods. They walk together through the overgrown path to the base of the lighthouse. The door is unlocked. The hinges rusted but still functional. Inside, the air is cold and damp, smelling of salt and stone. The spiral staircase winds upward into shadow. They climb slowly, their footsteps echoing in the narrow space, the light fading with each turn. At the top, they step out onto the observation deck, and the world opens around them. The view is vast. Endless gray ocean stretching to the horizon. Waves crashing white against the rocks below. Fog rolling in from the sea like a curtain being drawn across the world. Isla stands at the railing and looks out at the water, imagining her father standing here every night for 20 years, watching, waiting, searching for something that would never come. Have you ever carried guilt for something you couldn't change? Sometimes the hardest part isn't forgiving others. It's believing you deserve to be forgiven. Let me know if you felt that weight. Kieran stands beside her, his voice quiet. "Hey, what do you think he was looking for?" Isla exhales slowly. Absolution. Forgiveness. Something to tell him it was okay. And he never found it? No, because it couldn't come from the sea. It had to come from him. They stand there for a long time, the wind cold against their faces, the sound of the waves far below. Finally, Isla says, "I spent 20 years hating him for leaving me, but he never left. He was here the whole time. He just couldn't reach me." Kieran turns to look at her. "Do you forgive him?" Isla doesn't answer immediately. She looks out at the sea, at the place where Liam Callahan disappeared, at the horizon where sky and water blur into one pale line. "I don't know," she says finally, "but I think I understand him now. And maybe that's the first step." Kieran nods. "What's the second step?" Isla looks at her son, and for the first time since they arrived on this island, she smiles. It's small, fragile, but it's real. "Forgiving myself," she says, "for not knowing, for not being able to save him either." They stand together on the observation deck as the sun sets behind the fog, the lighthouse dark and silent beneath them, and the island waiting below. Isla can't sleep. She lies in bed listening to the wind move through the trees, the sound of waves crashing against the rocks, the creaking of the cottage settling around her. But her mind won't quiet. It keeps circling back to the journal, to Marin's words, to the realization that her father spent 40 years apologizing to a stranger, but never to her. Finally, she gets up. She walks to Callum's desk in the dark and sits down, pulling a blank sheet of paper from the drawer. She finds a pen and writes 2 words at the top of the page, "Dear Dad." Then she stops. Her hand hovers over the paper, the pen trembling slightly. She doesn't know what to say to a man who's gone. She doesn't know how to speak to someone who spent decades writing letters he never sent, who carried guilt like a stone in his chest until it crushed him. But she writes anyway. "I spent 20 years hating you. I hated you for shutting me out, for choosing silence over me, for making me believe I wasn't enough to pull you back from wherever you'd gone." Her handwriting is uneven, the words spilling out faster than she can control. "I built a life far away, so I'd never have to feel that abandonment again. I told myself you didn't care, that you'd already left long before I did, that I was better off without you. She pauses, her throat tight, her eyes burning. But I was wrong. You didn't leave. You were drowning. And I didn't know how to save you. I didn't even know you needed saving. She sets the pen down and presses her hands against her face, her breath shaky. The next morning, Kieran finds her still sitting at the desk, the letter unfinished in front of her. He reads it silently, his expression unreadable, then sits down beside her. Maybe he didn't know how to ask for forgiveness. Kieran says quietly, maybe that's why he never did. Isla looks at her son, her voice raw. I wanted him to. I wanted him to tell me why he stopped being my father. But he never did. And now I'll never know if he even understood how much it hurt. Kieran picks up the pen and holds it out to her. Then tell him. Isla takes the pen, her hands steadier now. She writes, I wish you told me the truth. Not because it would have fixed everything, but because I could have understood. I could have known you were carrying something unbearable. I could have tried to help, but you didn't let me. You locked yourself away in your guilt and left me to wonder what I'd done wrong. She pauses, then continues, I forgive you. Not because what you did was right, not because it didn't hurt, but because carrying your shame for you won't bring you back. And I'm tired of carrying it. I wish you'd forgiven yourself. I wish you'd let me love you despite your guilt. I wish you'd believed you deserved grace, but you didn't. And now all I can do is let you go. She sets the pen down and looks at Kieran. Is that enough? Kieran nods. Yeah, I think it is. That afternoon they walk to the lighthouse together. The sky is overcast, the air cold and damp, the wind sharp against their faces. They climb the spiral staircase in silence, their footsteps echoing in the narrow space, and step out onto the observation deck. Isla holds the letter in her hands, the paper folded carefully, her father's name written on the outside in her own handwriting. Kieran pulls a lighter from his pocket and hands it to her. She looks at him. Are you sure? Yeah, he says. He spent 40 years holding on to this. It's time to let it go. Isla nods. She unfolds the letter one last time, reading the words she wrote, then holds the edge to the flame. The paper catches quickly, the fire spreading across the page, consuming her words, turning them to ash. She holds it as long as she can, watching the smoke curl upward, then releases it over the railing. The ashes scatter on the wind, carried out over the ocean, disappearing into the gray water below. They stand there in silence, watching the sea, the wind cold and steady around them. After a long moment, Kieran says, Do you feel different? Isla exhales slowly. I don't know. Maybe. A little lighter. That's something. Yeah, it is. That evening, Isla's phone rings. It's Maren. I wanted to tell you something, Maren says, her voice soft over the line. Your father came to see me one last time, a few months before he died. He asked me again if I hated him. Isla closes her eyes. I told him no, Maren continues. And this time, he cried, really cried. I'd never seen him like that. He said he didn't know how to forgive himself, and I told him that Liam would have forgiven him, that Liam wouldn't have wanted him to carry this for 40 years. Isla's voice is barely a whisper. Did he believe you? Maren is quiet for a moment. I don't know, but I hope so. I told him he'd saved 6 people that night. That he was a good man who made an impossible choice, and that it was time to let himself be human. Isla wipes her eyes. Thank you for telling me. He loved you, Maren says gently, even if he couldn't show it. The guilt made him believe he didn't deserve to. But he did, and I think, somewhere deep down, he knew that. After they hang up, Isla sits on the porch of the cottage, looking out at the lighthouse standing dark against the evening sky. Kieran sits beside her, his shoulder touching hers. Do you think he ever forgave himself? He asks. Isla looks at the ocean, at the place where she scattered the ashes of her letter, at the horizon where sky and water blur together. I don't know, she says, but I think he tried, and maybe that's enough. They sit together in the gathering dark, the island quiet around them, the lighthouse standing watch over the sea. And for the first time since they arrived, Isla feels like she can breathe. They spend the next 2 weeks working, not to restore the island to what it was, but to tend it, to make it livable, to show it care. Isla replaces the broken shutters on the cottage, one at a time, her hands learning the weight of the hammer, the rhythm of driving nails into weathered wood. Kieran clears the overgrown paths through the forest, pulling back brambles and fallen branches until the trails open up again, revealing stone markers and views of the sea she'd forgotten existed. They repaint the dock together, kneeling side by side on the weathered planks, brushing fresh white paint over wood gone gray with age and salt. The work is slow, methodical, grounding. Gives them something to do with their hands while their minds process everything they've learned. One afternoon, while they're working on the lighthouse's exterior, it's scraping off peeling paint, patching cracks in the stone. Kieran asks, "What was he like before?" Isla pauses, her hand resting on the scraper. "Before what?" "Before he stopped being your dad." She's quiet for a long moment, looking up at the lighthouse tower rising above them. Then she sets the scraper down and sits on the grass, her back against the stone wall. Kieran sits beside her. "He was kind," she says finally. "Patient. He taught me how to navigate by the stars when I was 10. We'd go out on the boat at night and he'd point out the constellations, tell me their stories. Orion, Cassiopeia, the Big Dipper. He said if you knew the stars, you'd never be lost." Kieran smiles. "That's pretty cool." "Yeah, it was." Isla pulls a blade of grass and twists it between her fingers. "He used to make me hot chocolate on foggy mornings. Real hot chocolate, not the instant kind. He'd heat the milk on the stove and stir in cocoa powder and sugar until it was perfect. We'd sit on the porch and watch the fog roll in from the sea." "What else?" He hummed, constantly, old sea shanties mostly. Songs his father taught him. He'd hum while he fixed the lighthouse, while he cleaned the lantern glass, while he worked on the boat. It drove my mom crazy, but I loved it. It meant he was happy. Kieran's voice is quiet. "When did he stop?" Isla exhales slowly. "When my mom died. He stopped humming, stopped looking at me, stopped talking mostly. He just became a shadow. I tried to reach him, but it was like he couldn't see me anymore, like I disappeared. But you hadn't." "No, I hadn't. He had." Kieran is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "He was drowning." Isla nods. "Yeah. And I didn't know how to save him. I was 16. I didn't understand what guilt like that could do to a person. Do you think he wanted to be saved?" Isla looks at her son, surprised by the question. Then she looks back at the lighthouse, at the place where her father stood for 20 years, watching the sea. "I don't know," she says. "Maybe not. Maybe he thought he deserved to drown." They sit in silence. For a while, the sound of waves in the distance, the wind moving gently through the trees. A week later, they take the ferry back to Port Malin, one last time. Maren greets them at the door with a small wooden box in her hands. She invites them in, pours tea, and sets the box on the table between them. "I want you to have these," she says, opening the lid. Inside, a brass compass, tarnished but intact, a simple gold wedding ring, and a photograph of a young man standing on the deck of a ship, his hand raised in a wave, his smile bright and unguarded. Liam. "He was 22 when this was taken," Maren says softly, touching the edge of the photograph. 2 weeks before the storm. He was so excited about the wedding. about becoming a father. Isla's throat tightens. Maren looks at her. Your father saved 6 men that night, 6 people who went home to their families, 6 lives that continued because of the choice he made. I don't want you to forget that. I won't. And I want you to keep the island, Maren says. Don't sell it. Let it be a place of memory, not just of what was lost, but of what was saved. Your father spent 40 years punishing himself. Don't let that be the only thing the island represents. Isla takes the box carefully, holding it in her lap. Thank you. Maren smiles. Liam would have liked your father. He would have understood why he made the choice he did. And he would have forgiven him. On their last evening before the 30 days are up, Isla and Kieran sit on the dock and watch the sunset. The sky is streaked with pink and gold, the clouds thin and delicate, the water calm. The lighthouse stands behind them, its beacon still dark, but the glass cleaned, the stone repaired, the paint fresh on the doorframe. Kieran's voice breaks the silence. Are we keeping it? Isla looks at him. Do you want to? He shrugs. I don't know. Maybe. It feels wrong to sell it now. Isla nods slowly. She looks out at the water, at the place where her father stood every night for 2 decades, searching for something he'd never find. I think we keep it, she says, not to live here, but to let it be what it is, a place that holds pain and memory and loss, but also hope maybe, that people can try to make things right, even when they can't. Kieran leans his head on her shoulder. That sounds good. They sit in silence as the sun sinks below the horizon, the sky deepening from gold to purple to blue. The light from the cottage window reflects faintly on the water, a small glow in the gathering dark. Isla isn't angry anymore. She's tired, deeply tired. But it's a different kind of tired than the one she carried when she first arrived. This is the tiredness that comes after release, after letting go of something you've been holding on to for too long, and that's enough. For now, that's enough. 4 months later, they return to the island. It's March now, the anniversary of the storm that changed everything. The sky is clear, the air cold, but bright, the kind of day where light reflects off the water like broken glass, and the world feels sharper, more vivid, more present. Isla stands at the ferry railing as the island comes into view. Kieran beside her, both of them quiet. The island looks different in daylight, in clarity, less haunted, more like a place that's been waiting patiently for someone to come back. They've decided to keep it. Isla took a remote job with a medical coding company that lets her work from anywhere. They'll spend summers here, maybe some weekends in spring and fall. Kieran is learning to sail. He's been restoring the old wooden boat they found at the dock, replacing rotted planks, sanding down the hull, repainting it the same faded blue it used to be. The work is slow, but he doesn't rush. He's learned that some things are worth taking time with. When they dock, Isla carries a small bundle of wildflowers, purple and white, tied with twine. She walks to the base of the lighthouse and kneels in the grass, placing them against the stone foundation. For Callum, Kieran asks, standing beside her. For both of them, Isla says. Callum and Liam. She stays there for a moment, her hand resting on the cold stone, her eyes closed. When she stands, Kieran takes her hand, and they walk back to the cottage together. That afternoon they climb the lighthouse. The beacon is repaired now. Isla hired a marine electrician from the mainland 3 weeks ago, and he spent 2 days replacing the wiring, cleaning the lens, and restoring the rotating mechanism. Tonight, for the first time in 20 years, the lighthouse will shine. At the top of the tower, they stand at the railing and look out at the sea. The water is calm today, the waves gentle, the horizon clear and infinite. Kieran's voice is quiet. Do you think he'd be happy we kept it? Isla considers the question. I don't know, but I think he'd be relieved. Why? Because he wanted someone to understand. And we do now. Kieran nods. He's grown taller in the past few months. His shoulders broader, his voice deeper. He's not a boy anymore. He's someone who's learning how to carry weight without letting it crush him. What do you think he was trying to prove? Kieran asks. By staying here all those years? Isla looks out at the water. I don't think he was trying to prove anything. I think he was punishing himself. And maybe waiting for forgiveness, for permission to let go, for something that would tell him it was okay to stop carrying it. But it never came. No, because it couldn't come from the sea. It had to come from him. They're quiet for a long moment. Then Isla says, the light should shine again, not for him, for whoever comes next, for the people who need to find their way home. Kieran smiles. I think he'd like that. That evening, as the sun sets and the sky deepens from gold to indigo, the lighthouse beacon comes to life. It sweeps across the water in a slow, steady arc, cutting through the twilight. Visible for miles, Isla and Kieran stand on the dock and watch it turn, the light passing over them, over the trees, over the sea. On the ferry back to the mainland the next morning, Kieran asks, have you forgiven him? Isla looks out at the island shrinking behind them, the lighthouse still visible against the gray sky. I think so. But forgiveness isn't something you finish. It's something you practice. Like tending a light, you just keep showing up. Kieran leans his head on her shoulder. I'm glad we kept it. Me too. As the ferry pulls into the harbor, Isla looks back one more time. The lighthouse stands tall and bright, its beacon sweeping across the morning sky, steady and unbroken. She thinks about Callum standing at the top of that tower for 40 years, alone with his guilt, never believing he deserved the light he kept burning for others. She thinks about Liam, swept away by the sea, and the 6 men who made it home because of a choice made in seconds. She thinks about Marin, who built a life despite her loss, who offered grace that couldn't be accepted. And she thinks about herself, the girl who left this island 20 years ago, swearing she'd never come back, and the woman who returned to find that some legacies aren't meant to be escaped. They're meant to be understood. She learned that inheritance isn't just land or memory. It's the choice to carry forward what matters and release what doesn't. The heaviest things we inherit are often invisible. The guilt, the silence, the belief that we don't deserve grace. But we also inherit the chance to do better, to forgive what couldn't be undone, to let the light shine again, not because the past was perfect, but because the people who came before us were human, flawed, trying their best in impossible moments. And because we're still here, still standing, still choosing what comes next. The ferry docks, and Isla and Kieran walk down the ramp together, the island behind them, the mainland ahead. But they'll be back. They always will. Because some places hold more than memory. They hold the possibility of what we can become when we finally understand what we've been carrying and decide at last to put some of it down. She learned that inheritance isn't just what's left behind. It's what we choose to carry forward and what we finally allow ourselves to release. The heaviest things we inherit are often invisible. The guilt we didn't earn, the silence we learned to speak, the belief that we don't deserve forgiveness for being human. But we also inherit something else, the chance to do better, to understand what couldn't be explained, to forgive what couldn't be undone. Some legacies aren't meant to be escaped, they're meant to be understood. And sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to tend the light someone else kept burning, not because they were perfect, but because they tried.